With this site, with Upward Sun River, it opens an entirely new aspect of human behavior. For instance, before this find, we really didn't know how they made houses, or even if they made semi-subterranean houses. Maybe they had tents. You'd have hides draped around wood framework, something like that. We'd never really find the evidence of that. As people travel further and further north, away from that homeland, and of course, the far north here in Beringia, within Alaska, presents almost insurmountable obstacles. We can imagine ourselves without modern conveniences trying to survive at 40 below with almost no light. It's kind of hard to imagine, but yet we have anatomically modern humans adapting in that very way. And part of the trajectory that I want to understand as an anthropologist, exactly how did that occur? How did they take the technology, the know-how that they had adapted within Siberia, how did they use that technology, and how did the new environments change them as they came into the New World? We have really well-preserved examples of semi-subterranean houses throughout the Arctic in more recent time periods. So we know this is a kind of a house. In terms of efficiency in retaining heat, it's going to be better if you're dug in, and this makes sense in terms of construction and engineering. So we know that they were doing that, not any one type of people, but basically it's an Arctic adaptation, it's a subarctic adaptation. Now this is the first we found, and the earliest we found in the world, basically. So there we have to be careful. Right now we only have a portion of the house excavated. We had the pit that we centered on, and we thought we had enough space to dig out the pit in its entirety. We were able to get all of that, but we intersected basically 75%, 50%, maybe it's going to be unclear until we go back out and try to get the entire circumference of the feature. But we have enough of it that you can tell it's roughly circular in dimension, which most of them are, that we have other examples for. We can identify that they're dug down, maybe about that far below the surface. At least the evidence now indicates that. It seems to have one occupation floor, but there may be evidence of another occupation floor below it. We're carefully looking at all of the hypotheses and all of the possibilities for reuse. We do know that some houses in Siberia were reused over time, and it would not be outside the realm of possibility that we have that here. So we want to make sure we're capturing the potential for that. So imagine, if you will, a dug-in, relatively flat floor plan with this pretty deep hearth. The hearth itself is roughly about 2 or 3 feet in dimension. We know there are cooking food elements there. Almost all of the elements are burned, which means they were not falling in after the fire, but actually consumed at that time frame. We know there are multiple layers, so probably we've got a number of activities. Now, seasonality-wise, when were they there? From the salmon presence, it's a summer animal. Independently, we have immature ground squirrel specimens. That also indicates summer. So all of the evidence so far indicates that, at least from the remains we found so far, they were there in the summer. Were they there in the winter? I think it's not unreasonable to say that some element of the population probably was. I mean, you don't build a house like that necessarily. That's over-engineering for a summer. We know in more recent time periods, tents were more commonly used for the mobility that you would need in the summer time frame. But it's not unreasonable to suggest that this was a multi-seasonal camp. We will also try to understand the relationship between the activities that took place within the house and the activities outside. In the same occupation layer, we have 2 outdoor hearths, so kind of more typical that we would find in the region at this time period. So we want to understand, are they taking certain elements to burn, to consume within the house versus what they're doing outside? I mean, it opens up a whole new window to understand site structure. And by that, how do people organize their settlements? How do we organize our settlements? It's complicated. It depends on a lot of different factors. There are other arguments that maybe they were more highly mobile than we think, so they really didn't stay in place long enough to build those kinds of features. Tied with the Siberian evidence, where we know they're making semi-subterranean houses, up to 14,000 years ago, and we know they're making them here at 11,500, and that coupled with the kinds of artifacts that they were making 14,000 years ago here, they're making 2,000 years ago in the same environment. That's extraordinary from an anthropological perspective, that their adaptations were resilient enough to enable people to transcend huge amounts of climate change. So imagine hunting mammoth and bison, 14,000 years ago with this technology in a treeless setting, basically, a grasslands, sedgelands, and using that same technology 2,000 years ago to hunt caribou and moose in the boreal forest. That's amazingly striking. And so what this find enables us to do is to get a much broader picture, a window into their overall lifeways within interior Alaska.